Hi friends, here we are, big book breakdown. I'm going to read the foreword to the second edition now, okay? So after they wrote that first edition and they put it out there, about 100 people got sober, got an answer, and they started getting ready for everything. Oh, my hair's kind of sticking up. For everything to start, ramping up. So this is what happened. In 1955, so 1939 to 55, was 16 years. So 16 years later, they decided to update the book. And like I said, they didn't update the first 165 pages. So let's see what they did do. And let's see what was going on, like how much had Alcoholics Anonymous changed in that 16 years. Since the original, forward to the second edition. Figures given in this foreword describe the fellowship as it was in 1955. So if you could imagine, 1955, remember what was going on in 1950s, right? Sock hops, think about time and how much time has passed since then. And we're still using the same literature. I love it. Since the original foreword to this book was written in 1939, a wholesale miracle has taken place. Our earliest printing voiced the hope that every alcoholic who journeys will find the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous at its destination. Already, continues the early text, 2s and 3s and 5s of us has sprung up in other communities. 16 years have elapsed between our first printing of this book and the presentation in 1955 of our second edition. In that brief space, Alcoholics Anonymous has mushroomed into nearly 6,000 groups whose membership is far above 150,000 recovered alcoholics. Groups are to be found in each of the United States and all of the provinces of Canada. AA has flourished in communities in the British Isles, the Scandinavian countries, South Africa, South America, Mexico, Alaska, Australia, and Hawaii. All told, promising beginnings have been made in some 50 foreign countries and U.S. possessions. Some are just now taking shape in Asia. Many of our friends encourage us by saying that this is but a beginning, only the augury of a much larger future ahead. Little did they know, huh? The spark that was to flare into the first AA group was struck at Akron, Ohio in June 1935. During a talk between a New York stockbroker and an Akron physician, okay, so they're talking about the very first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Very first one alcoholic talking to another was in 35. They didn't write the book until 39, okay? And the very first time that they talked about this, they're talking about a New York stockbroker, that's Bill W., who wrote the book, and they're talking about an Akron physician. And that is Dr. Bob. Okay, that's Dr. Bob's nightmare. We're going to read about that later. Those two guys. 6 months earlier, that broker, Bill W., had been relieved of his drink obsession by a sudden spiritual experience following a meeting with an alcoholic friend who had been in contact with the Oxford groups of that day. He had also been greatly helped by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth, a New York specialist in alcoholism who is now accounted no less than a medical saint by AA members and whose story of the early days of our society appear in the next pages. Dr. Silkworth is the one that wrote Doctor's Opinion, which is coming up. From this doctor, the broker had learned the grave nature of alcoholism. Though he could not accept the tenets of the Oxford group, he was convinced of the need for moral inventory, confession of personality defects, restitution to those harmed, helpfulness to others, and the necessity of the belief in the dependence on God. Okay, those are basically the steps. The Oxford group had 6 tenets, not 6 steps, not 12 steps, but 6 tenets. And Bill really, he couldn't accept all of those. Like, he didn't get it. But he was convinced of the need for the moral inventory, right? That's step 4. Confession of personality defects, that's step 5. Restitutions of those harmed, that's steps 9. Helpfulness to others, that's step 12. and the necessity of a belief and dependence on God. That's 1, 2, 3, 10, and 11. Prior to his journey to Akron, the broker had worked hard with many alcoholics on the theory that only one alcoholic could help another alcoholic, but he had succeeded only in keeping himself sober. The broker had gone to Akron on a business venture which had collapsed, leaving him greatly in fear that he might start drinking again. He suddenly realized in order to save himself, he must carry the message to another alcoholic. That alcoholic turned out to be the Akron physician. This physician had repeatedly tried to stay sober by spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, but had failed. But when the broker gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, the physician began to pursue the spiritual remedy for his malady with a willingness he had never before been able to muster. He sobered, never to drink again, up to the moment of his death in 1950. This seemed to prove that one alcoholic could affect another as no non-alcoholic could. It is also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. I'm going to read that part again. If you've got your book, please underline it. Strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. Hence, the two men set to work almost frantically upon alcoholics arriving in the ward of the Akron City Hospital. Their first case, a desperate one, recovered immediately and became AA number 3. He never had another drink. This work at Akron continued throughout the summer of 1935. There were many failures, but there was an occasional heartening success. When the broker returned to New York in the fall of 1935, the first AA group had actually been formed, though no one realized it at the time. A second small group promptly took shape at New York, to be followed in 1937 with the start of a third in Cleveland. Besides these, there were scattered alcoholics who had picked up the basic ideas in Akron or New York who were trying to form groups in other cities. By late 1937, the number of members having substantial sobriety time behind them was sufficient to convince the membership that a new light had entered the dark world of the alcoholic. It was now time, the struggling groups thought, to place their message and unique experience before the world. This determination bore fruit in the spring of 1939 by the publication of this volume. The membership had then reached about 100 men and women. The fledgling society, which had been nameless, now began to be called Alcoholics Anonymous from the title of its own book. The flying blind period ended, and AA entered a new phase of its pioneering time. With the appearance of the new book, a great deal began to happen. Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick, the noted clergyman, reviewed it with approval. In the fall of 1939, Fulton Alsler, then editor of Liberty, printed a piece in his magazine called Alcoholics and God. This brought a rush of 800 frantic inquiries into the little New York office, which meanwhile had been established. Each inquiry was painstakingly answered. Pamphlets and books were sent out. Businessmen traveling out of their existing groups were referred to these prospective newcomers. New groups started up, and it was found, to the astonishment of everyone, that AA's message could be transmitted in the mail, as well as by word of mouth. By the end of 1939, it was estimated that 800 alcoholics were on their way to recovery. So back in the day, people wrote letters, please help me, please help me, please help me. And someone sent them information and said, this is what you need to do. We're going to send you the book and instructions. Check back with us. Tell us how you did. So it's no surprise to me that in this pandemic, people have been able to get sober at home with Zoom, right? People are able to do the program if they want to get sober. We give them the information by phone, modem, fax, whatever. And if they're serious and they want to do the program, we take them through the program and they can stay sober and they can take someone else through the program. Okay? So it's doable. In the spring of 1940, John D. Rockefeller gave a dinner for many of his friends to which he invited AA members to tell their stories. That's big news. John D. Rockefeller. Woohoo, big money. News of this got out on the world wires. Inquiries poured in, and again, many people went to the bookstores to get the book Alcoholics Anonymous. By March 1941, the membership had shot up to 2,000. Then Jack Alexander wrote a feature article in the Saturday Evening Post. That was big back then. And placed such a compelling picture of AA before the general public that alcoholics in need of help really deluged us. By the close of 1941, 2 years after they wrote the book, AA numbered 8,000 members. The mushrooming process was in full swing. AA had become a national institution. How much do I have? This is the longest foreword of all of them. So maybe I should stop now. Let me read a little bit more. I'd like to do the whole thing in one reading, but I don't know how interested you guys are in this. You know, you start losing interest. We have short attention spans now. I'm going to read a little bit more, and then I'm going to stop, and I'm going to do the second part of the first edition, forward to the second edition next time. Okay, so we don't lose interest. Our society then entered a fearsome and exciting adolescent period. The test that it faced was this: could these large numbers of erstwhile erratic alcoholics be successfully meet and work together? Would there be quarrels over membership, leadership, and money? Yes. Would there be strivings for power and prestige? Yes. Would there be schisms which would split AA apart? Not AA, but some meetings, right? That's how new meetings got started back in the day. Somebody got pissed off with a resentment, grabbed the coffee pot, and started another meeting. Soon AA was beset by these very problems on every side and in every group. You know, and that's because alcoholics are difficult people. We all want to run the show. We all know what's best. We're all in charge, you know, and so everyone wants to take over. So yeah, every group was having problems. But out of this frightening and at first disrupting experience, the conviction grew that AAs had to hang together or die separately. We had to unify our fellowship or pass off the scene. As we discovered the principles by which the individual alcoholic could live, so we had to involve principles by which the AA groups and AA as a whole would survive and function effectively. It was thought that no alcoholic, man or woman, could be excluded from our society, that our leaders might serve but never govern, that each group was to be autonomous and there was to be no professional class of therapy. There were to be no fees or dues. Our expenses were to be met by our own voluntary contributions. There was to be the least possible organization, even in our service centers. Our public relations were based upon traction rather than promotion. It was decided that all members ought to be anonymous at the level of press, radio, TV, and films, and in no circumstances should we be given endorsements, make alliances, or enter into public controversies. This was the substance of AA's 12 traditions. If that sounds familiar, that's what that was. These are stated in full on page 561 of this book. Though none of these principles had the force or rules or laws, they had become so widely accepted by 1950 that they were confirmed by our first international conference held in Cleveland. Today, the remarkable unity of AA is one of the greatest assets that our society has. Oh, I want to keep reading this. Okay. While the internal difficulties of our adolescent period were being ironed out, public acceptance of AA grew by leaps and bounds. For this, there were two principal reasons: the large number of recoveries and reunited homes. These made their impressions everywhere. Of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried, 50% got sober at once and remained that way. 25% sobered up after some relapses, and among the remainder who stayed on with AA showed improvement. Other thousands came to a few AA meetings and at first decided they didn't want the program. But great numbers of these, about 2 out of 3, began to return as time passed. That's because the disease gets worse. So if you don't want it now, you might want it later. Another reason for the wide acceptance of AA was the ministration of friends in medicine, religion, and press, together with the innumerable others who are able and persistent advocates. Without such support, AA could have only made the slowest progress. Some of our recommendations of AA's early medical and religious friends will be found further on in this book. Alcoholics Anonymous is not a religious organization. Neither does AA take on any particular medical point of view, though we cooperate widely with the men of medicine as well as with the men of religion. Alcohol being no respecter of persons, we are an accurate cross-section of America, and in distant lands, the same democratic evening up process is now going on. By personal religious affliction, we include Catholics, Protestants, Jews, Hindus, and a sprinkling of Muslims and Buddhists. More than 15% of us are women. Remember, this is 1955. At present, our membership is pyramiding at the rate of about 20% a year. So far upon the total problem of several million actual and potential alcoholics in the world, we have made only a scratch. In all probability, we shall never be able to touch more than a fair fraction of the alcohol problem in all its ramifications. Upon therapy for the alcoholic himself, we surely have no monopoly. Yet it is our great hope that all of those have as yet found no answer may begin to find one in these pages, and will presently join us on the high road to a new freedom. I love this because, and I read the whole thing. I didn't stop because it's so important. This is the foreword to this second edition. The second edition is when the traditions were put in here. It also is very important that you understand that everybody is welcome. It is not related to any religious sect, denomination. And it's really important that you know we have no monopoly on this. Okay? There are a lot of ways, as I say, a lot of ways to skin a cat. That's a terrible saying, but it's the only one I could think of. There's a ton of ways to get sober. However, if you found that none of them have worked for you, like I did, you might find the answer right here. So join me next time. If you want to read ahead, read the foreword to the third edition, and I'll briefly break it down to you, and you are going to become a big book expert. Have a great day. Love you all.